Today's conference is hosted by University of Washington Advancement Services Reporting Group with the support of Annual Giving, Advancement Research and Relationship Management, the Ostara Group, and Persona. So thank you to all of those people, every single one of whom is a rank amateur at event planning. So what you're seeing here is a minor miracle, actually. A few housekeeping issues, if you haven't found them. The restrooms are across the hall and down. There's a sign that says restrooms and phones, but there are no phones. And there's also facilities down the hall in the other direction. We hope each of you picked up a peachy folder. You'll notice they're not just yellow anymore. And paper clipped inside of your peachy folder are a couple of items that look like this. These fell out of someone's folder. Don't all speak at once, but one of these items is a drink ticket. So if you're missing your drink ticket, come and get it from me later on. Just a few things for those of you who are wondering what you might do tonight, or if you're staying a little bit later, happenings in the Seattle area. We're currently having our Earshot Jazz Festival. Seattle is a big live jazz town, and the Jazz Festival is really a intense period of jazz performance around town at a variety of venues. So you can go online and find that if you like. Over at the Experience Music Project in the Seattle Center is an exhibit on Nirvana. And at the Seattle Art Museum, they're featuring a display of Asian art. We also put a list of some dinner options in your peachy folder. And if you're wondering, our resident celebrity chef is a guy named Tom Douglas, and he's got half a dozen restaurants around town featuring a variety of kinds of foods. So if you're looking for that sort of thing, please take advantage of that. Conference staff are wearing purple lanyards, so if you have any further questions or want more information, please talk to them. Welcome. I'm so happy to be doing this with all of you. My name is Walt Dryfoos, and I am Associate Vice President at the University of Washington. My motto is dare to be dull. So I wanted to prepare you because you've just doomed yourself to 45 minutes of listening to me, and I'm going to prove it. So whip out those handheld mobile devices and find something else to do surreptitiously while you pretend to listen to me. Now, dare to be dull is actually a replacement motto for one I had in my 20s, which was excess is not enough, but I had to give that one up for obvious reasons. So I decided to go with dare to be dull because I realized that there was no hope of being cool anymore in my life. And so I decided, well, instead of attempting to be cool, I would just embrace the fact that I'm dull. So part of that is that a good friend of mine, Kevin Jacques, told me that one should always wear a suit and tie when presenting, especially to people who don't know you or don't know you very well, because it creates an impression of authority and responsibility and so forth. And I just thought, well, nah, that would be putting lipstick on a pig. So I wore a Hawaiian shirt instead, and I'm glad to see that it's appropriate attire in this space. Give you a little capsule biography of me. My first professional job was as a licensed psychiatric technician at a state mental hospital in Camarillo, California. Camarillo State Hospital was a place where they sent people who were too insane to be in Los Angeles. So just think about what that must have been like. After 5 years in that field, I moved on, went to University of California at Berkeley and got an undergraduate degree in rhetoric and a master's degree in sociology, and then I went to St. Mary's College and picked up another master's years in counseling and organizational development, all of which clearly leaves me totally unprepared to be talking to you about information technology. So, but that's the grace. I started at Cal as a student employee in the Berkeley Engineering Fund in 1981, and I have been hiding in academe ever since. I spent about 9 years at Cal. I went up to Washington State University, where I worked for 11 years and 7 months. And since April Fool's Day of 2002, I have been at the University of Washington. My professional credentials in the field include 3 database conversions and 3 capital campaigns. So I'm a survivor. The thing that's important to me about being in education, I'm going on my 31st year in higher education, is that higher education is one of those few sources of genuine social mobility. The mission of our institution to do research and to prepare young people for life is extremely important to me, and this will resonate a little bit further in my talk. But I just think that what universities and colleges do is that they give people an opportunity to change their class status. People can come in from a working class family and change themselves into a middle class or even upper class individual. Only in the United States of America, Canada, and a few other countries is this even possible, even with education. And we create these kinds of opportunities. I'm proud to be involved in that. And I think that one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit later is that part of our job is to internalize and take advantage of the mission of our institution or organization. So here's what I do at the University of Washington, and this is really what I have done for the last 21 plus years. I provide leadership and vision in the development and use of enabling technologies and systems in support of university advancement and the mission of the University of Washington. I made that up. Well, what does it mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you what it means. I'm going to try to give you about a 40-minute demonstration of what it means. What I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm going to make about 5 key points. Networking, managing up, managing out, focus on mission, learn your clients' jobs, and counting drives behavior. I want to propose to you that the highest and best use of your energy is to deliver what your colleagues and institution need before they know they need it. That's where I'm going. So let's start. Networking. Who might we be? Well, let me tell you a little bit more about me. I am an introvert, and in the Myers-Briggs scheme of things, introversion really means that an introvert is a person who derives their energy from being alone, from being solitary, and has to expend energy to be with people. An extrovert in this concept is a person who derives energy from being with people and feels it to be draining when they are by themselves. I am an introvert, and I suspect that there are a disproportionate number of introverts in this crowd. You know who you are. Nonetheless, I would suggest that the highest value of this conference is the opportunity to network and talk with other people who have similar jobs, similar responsibilities, and similar challenges to those that you face. So please take advantage of this opportunity. Meet some of the people. Most of you are working in organizations where there are very few people in your role, and you don't have very many people to talk to. Take advantage of this opportunity, meet some other people that do what you do, and open lines of communication to talk to them. That means overcoming your natural reticence of the introvert and talking to strangers and so forth. But you just need to be aware that despite the fact that one is an introvert, one does not need to be ruled by one's personality type. You can live with it, you can adopt it, you can embrace your introversion just like I embrace my dullness, but you do not need to be constrained by it. So, network, the first clue for you. Now, the second thing I want to tell you is that how are we going to get in this direction of giving our colleagues and institution what they need before they know they need it? Well, what we have to do to achieve that is we have to manage. We have to manage ourselves, we have to manage our supervisors, we have to manage our colleagues, and we have to manage our subordinates if we have them. I call that manage up, manage out. Manage all of your professional relationships, whether it's with your boss or with your colleagues or with the people who report to you. The first meeting I had with my vice president at Washington State University in July of 1990, I took an agenda in and I said, here's my agenda for this meeting. And the first item on the agenda was how to manage me. And he laughed at me and he said, no employee has ever come in and told me how to manage. And this guy had a bit of an ego. Some of you might remember him because you were there. And he didn't think that he needed to be told how to manage his subordinates. But I'll tell you what, he needed to be told how to manage me. And I told him. I think that it's an important thing for you to think about. You need to overtly understand what it takes for you to be happy on the job and reach out and tell people, teach people how to manage you and manage them back in the way that you would like to be managed. Now, I understand that I'm saying stuff that sounds, oh, this is so optimized, this is pie in the sky, but we have work to do. We have all this stuff, we have all these demands, we don't have enough staff, we're underpaid and overworked and so forth. What I call that is making license plates. That's what one of the great jobs that you can get if you're a felon convicted in the state pen, you can make license plates. And so making license plates, you have some kind of a press and you have paint and the license plates are all the same except a number or a letter changes sequentially as they come through the assembly line and they get 10 or 15 cents an hour for making license plates. Every one of us has to make license plates. Even associate vice presidents have to make license plates on their job. Nonetheless, what we need to do is find some headroom over and above the time we spend making license plates. What is headroom? Well, a few years back I decided that being a motorcyclist couldn't be the only thing in my life besides my wife and family and my job. Family and job just get in the way of all those other things, but that's another story. So I decided to start playing the electric bass guitar. And in bass amplification, in electronic amplification of instruments, there's a concept called headroom. And headroom is the power between the power that's needed to broadcast the signal you're generating and the full power of your amplification system. And when you don't have sufficient headroom, you get distortion. The sound starts sounding weird. Now, as you probably know, if you're fans of rock and roll, distortion has its place, and some people actually like to pursue distortion. But what we really want to get a clean, clear signal at any volume is sufficient power, sufficient headroom between the loudest signal that we make with our instrument and the total output, potential output of our amplification system. To translate that, what I'm suggesting to you is that you need to figure out ways to create headroom in your job. And the headroom in this context is the capacity that you have after you've done making all the license plates and taking care of all the regular business of your job. We need to create some extra capacity so we can do some cool stuff. And you need to ask for it, you need to arrange your work so you can have it. One of the great ways to do this is, of course, to pursue efficiency. It's also to prioritize and decide what's most important. Now, another concept I want to talk to you about in the context of managing is that a lot of people like this question. When I've applied for a few management jobs. When I apply for them, people say to me, "What's your management style?" You ever asked that question or been asked that question? Well, the popular answer today is this. Oh, you know, what I like to do in management is I like to get my staff the resources they need to do their job. I like to give them a vision and a mission for how to do it, and then I like to give them air cover so that they don't have too many demands from outside impinging on their ability to meet that mission. That's today's popular statement everywhere except the U.S. military, which has a different kind of a mission. But it's not the right answer. From my perspective, the right answer is I manage people in the way that they need to be managed for the task at hand at the time. And that means, yes, sometimes I find myself micromanaging. Most of the time I like to do it the way I described it, the popular way. But if I want to get exactly what I want out of some of my people, sometimes I need to be very explicit about what it is I want and not just give them a broad-based mission and vision. So when you think about management, think about developing your styles so that you have the capacity to use different management styles in different situations with different people, because sometimes it's necessary to do so, and not everyone is responsive to the same style. This conference is an example of what you get, what I got when I managed the way I'm describing and created headroom in my organization for people to do creative things. Some of my folks in the reporting group decided that we needed to have a drive conference because there is nothing like this out there. Our professional organization and higher education case does not have a conference like that, and we couldn't find one. There isn't one. So they made it up, and I thank them. We should all thank them for it. That is what you get when you get headroom. So figure out what your institution and colleagues need, because otherwise what's going to happen to you is you're going to be listening to what they say they want. And I've been there, and what happens is you get into a death spiral of scope creep and unmet expectations. Anybody ever been in that death spiral around here? So I can throw my people into that death spiral in a heartbeat. And in fact, I think after they stepped in to find out what it takes to plan a conference like this, they felt they were in a death spiral for the last few weeks, but they're going to snap out of it next week, I think. I hope. So here's an example of the kind of conversation that we can have when we are not doing what I'm suggesting. "You are sad," the knight said in an anxious tone. "Let me sing you a song to comfort you." "Is it very long?" Alice asked, for she had heard a good deal of poetry that day. "It's long," said the knight, "but very, very beautiful. Everybody that hears me sing it, either it brings tears into their eyes or else..." "Or else what?" said Alice, for the knight had made a sudden pause. "Or else it doesn't, you know. The name of the song is called Haddock's Eyes." "Oh, that's the name of the song, is it?" Alice said, trying to feel interested. "No, you don't understand," the knight said, looking a little vexed. "That's what the name is called. The name really is The Aged, Aged Man." Then I ought to have said, that's what the song is called, Alice corrected herself. No, you oughtn't. That's quite another thing. The song is called Ways and Means, but that's only what it's called, you know. Well, what is the song then? Said Alice, who was by this time completely bewildered. I was coming to that, the knight said. The song really is a sittin' on a gate, and the tune's my own invention. See, when you're a rhetoric major, you learn to read poetry aloud, so I'm taking advantage of the guys. That was from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. To avoid being like Alice in this scenario, you, regardless of what your role is, need to lead the conversation to develop common understandings, mutually understood terms, and clear, concise project specifications and expected outcomes. Now, how do you tell that you're in a situation like this? I'm sure you can imagine this, but let me just give you a couple of suggestions about what I've seen. I came into one of the organizations I worked for a few years back, and I asked a relatively simple question. What is the proportion of ad hoc reports to standardized reports? How many ad hoc reports are you doing in any given period compared to the number of standardized reports that are generated, pulled, or pushed? And what I found was the answer was about 5 to 1 ad hoc to standardized. That gives me a clue that the standardized reports are not meeting most of the need out there. And I want it inverted. I want the standardized reports to do 80% of the work for us, to meet the need that's out there. That's a lot easier said than done. And what you need to do is you have all the data in front of you. You have all the report requests that are ad hoc reports, and you can look at them and analyze them, find out the commonalities in them, and then make some decisions about how you're going to convert some of those things into standardized reports. Now, this is what I'm talking about looking for what people actually need rather than what they say they want. Because if you created a standardized report out of every single ad hoc report you got, you would have a gazillion standardized reports, and you'd still be in the same situation because people wouldn't be able to find the standardized report that did what they wanted, so they asked for it ad hoc anyway, right? Been there, done that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making some broad, multi-purpose reports that do contain the data that you're fulfilling with the ad hoc reports, but also contain other data, and then taking on the training burden of teaching people how to use those reports. You can't just present them, you have to teach them how to use them. And a few years of doing that sort of thing gets you into the situation that we're talking about, which is that then your standardized reports are meeting most of the need, and the ad hoc reports are for things like lists and labels and event invitations and so forth, things that need a few iterations sometimes to figure out the correct number of people to invite against the yield you're expecting. Another clue on this, shadow databases. When you're looking around and you're seeing that people are inventing ways to meet needs that you're not meeting by creating their own shadow databases, Excel spreadsheets, Access databases, Fox Pro, Rolodexes, card files, that's another clue. So some practical ways for you to go about making the distinction between what the name of a song is called versus what is the name of the song versus what the song is. We want to know all of those things. In order to get ahead of this and stop asking our folks or waiting for them to tell us what they want, we need to figure some of these things out. So let me illustrate this in another way. You need to get agreement on the rules and standards that will be followed in enumerating results. Everybody thinks counting is easy and that they know how to do it. So let me give you an example of how this works.
I figure 75% to you, Pa and Ma, and 25% divided between the 5 of us. Gina, Crowbar, myself, Tom, and the baby. That makes 5% for each one of us.
Billy, you're cheating yourself. If there's 25% divided among the 5 of you, that's 14% apiece.
Oh, no, listen, Pa. I wouldn't cheat you. You know I wouldn't. Now, look here. I'll show you. Let me rub this out here. And now, 25 divided by 5 is 5. You see, 5 won't go into 2, will it? No. But 5 goes into 25 5 times, you see?
No, you're wrong, Billy. Now, I'm pretty good mathematician. Now, 5 into 25, 5 won't go into 2, will it?
No.
But 5 goes into 5 once. Now, we didn't use the 2 before, so we bring it down here. 5 into 25, 14.
No, look, Pa. Now, let me prove it to you now by modification. 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25.
I'm surprised you're learning.
Huh?
I'm surprised that you're learning. Now I'll show you. 5 times 14 is 25. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5.
You're wrong there because I'll prove it to you. We'll put down 5 14s here. 14, 14, 14. There. Now I'll prove to you by addition that 5 14s is not 25. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20,
21, 22.
Okay, so being who we are, I am actually mocking frontline fundraisers. But I figured that's a safe bet in this crowd. But we need to get agreement on what our accounting standards are and how we do it before we start creating reports, because otherwise folks are going to come in and start telling us how they think it ought to go. And of course, the first choice you have there is cash accounting versus accruals accounting. We're also talking about being audit compliant and so forth. So that's the hammer that we have to make sure that we have some accounting standards that are equitably applied. Define the term standards, accounting policy, and general accounting principles you'll be following before you start developing those reports. Okay, so those are a couple of building blocks. Now, how are we going to decide what to do? Well, I was moved, as were many of us, by the passing of Steve Jobs. And I read a couple of things about him that I brought today. Mr. Jobs' own research and intuition, not focus groups, were his guide. When asked what market research went into the iPad, Mr. Jobs replied, none. It's not the consumer's job to know what they want. Same point. We don't want to know what they want, we want to know what they need. So one of the editorialists, an obituary writer, John Markoff in the New York Times, explained this. He said, it's not the consumer's job to know what they want. In other words, while Mr. Jobs tried to understand the problems that technology could solve for his buyer, he wasn't going to rely on the buyer to demand specific solutions, just so he could avoid ever having to take a risk and make that decision. This is what's commonly known as leading. So, that's what I would like to suggest is our highest and best use of our time. Start by letting the mission of your organization inform your strategy, then lead by taking the risk and focus on giving your colleagues what they need to be successful at their job. Now, another element of this is, I think, pretty clear at this point, which is that you need to understand what their jobs are. So you need to go be with them. And this is us trying to hang out with a bunch of frontline fundraisers and learn what they do and how they do it. We are different kinds of people, and our frontline fundraiser friends are lovely human beings, and yet they are more like Ma and Pa Kettle than they are like data wonks, which is us. So what I suggest to you on this is to start by going to the trainings that they go to the meetings that they go to, talk to them, and learn what their pain points are. The way that I did this was that in 1995, after I had been Director of Advancement Services at Washington State University for 5 years, I asked my supervisor to give me a frontline fundraising job. It was stepping off the deep end without knowing how to swim. She complied and gave me the job of Director of Development at the WSU Libraries. And of course, I was still Director of Advancement Services. I did not lose my old job. I just picked this up as a 1 day a week, 20% time job nominally. Well, I went out to make donor calls, and I had one remarkable success with a woman by the name of Mildred Bissinger. And Mildred was an alumnus of the university, and she was in her mid-80s, I think, at the time. And at the time, she was giving about $1,000 a year. So on my first visit, I went down with my colleague, Kevin Jacques, who's the guy who told me I should be wearing a suit right now. And Kevin kind of coached me. He said, Millie is about 4'11" and 85 pounds. And so one of the things you have to do, Walt, is you have to make yourself small because you don't want to scare Millie, okay? So make yourself small. All right, now, do you guys have any idea how to make yourself small? Neither do I. But this was frank and really thoughtful advice. How do you present yourself in a way that's going to be inviting and not intimidating to this donor? So we go down to Millie's house, and she invites us in, and she's a widow living alone in her long-time home, and she serves us tea and some of those little Pepperidge Farm Milano cookies on a nice piece of china, and she shares some old books and manuscripts that she wants us to take back to the library. Excuse me. And she does not say anything to me about money. So what I had to learn right at that moment was you have to ask. You absolutely have to ask. So I asked her. My friend is kind of slugging me with his elbow, and he's wondering when I'm going to get to it. And so I asked her if she would consider upgrading her contribution to $5,000, and we talked about it for a while, and then she did. She got out her checkbook and wrote me a check for $5,000, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. It was a big yes moment, and I persevered with that relationship, going to the San Francisco Bay Area once or twice a year and seeing if I could visit with her and visiting with her, getting to know her, talking to her, getting her invited up to see a lecture that she had sponsored in our College of Arts and Sciences. And when it was all said and done, at the end of a few years, Millie passed away and left about $1.6 million to the university, a large chunk of which went to the libraries. She was probably going to do it anyway. It wasn't me, really. But that's not the point. The point is that I had to learn some new things about how to do this job that don't have anything to do with data. They don't have anything to do with preparing with a great prospect profile. They do have something to do with filing contact reports. But I learned a lot about what it takes to go out there and make the ask and get in front of people. And what I encourage you to do is figure out a way to do that in the context of your own organization. Everybody here works at a nonprofit except one, the person from Krill, and welcome. We're really glad to have you too. Yeah, way to go. But for those of you in the nonprofit world, you're out there and part of your job is undoubtedly supporting revenue generation in your organization. And you need to get on the other side. The only way you're going to get past what people want to what they need is by getting into their shoes and figuring out what that might be. So, the highest and best use of your energy is to deliver what your colleagues and institution needs before they know they need it, and manage up and manage out, actively manage all of your relationships at work, up, out, and down. Next point, counting drives behavior. I told you that I started out working at a state mental hospital. My first job as a licensed psychiatric technician, which is kind of like a licensed professional nurse or a LVN, licensed vocational nurse, except that it just has a lot more intense training on psychiatry and psychiatric disorders. My first job was on a special clinical research unit that was associated with the UCLA USC Neuropsychological Institute, and we ran a token economy behavioral program on patients who were the most refractory patients from around that grim mental hospital. These are people who many of whom had been institutionalized for a long time, both adults and children who had serious psychiatric problems. But the thing that makes you refractory in an institutional setting like that are mainly two things. One is incontinence, and the other is assaultive or aggressive behavior. And so what we really tried to do was to suppress those kinds of behaviors and encourage behavior that didn't include incontinence and aggression. And we did that with the token economy, which really involved having these poor caffeine and nicotine addicted people have to behave the way that we wanted them to in order to earn tokens so that we could sell them back their the cure for their addiction, which was cigarettes and coffee. Works pretty well, actually. Addiction can help you. It can be your friend. And we had some really good experience with this. We got people to stop hitting. We got people to go to the bathroom, and we subsequently were able to place some of those people in community settings and group homes and so forth. So I learned about behaviorism in that context. What I'm doing now with counting drives behavior is that you get what you measure, so you need to measure what you want to get. I'm going to show you a couple of different things here. In the context of metrics of counting, you get into either counting activity or counting outcomes. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about counting activity. You don't really need activity metrics until the outcomes aren't where you needed them to be. And then people are going to come and say, okay, so what have you been doing that resulted in us not getting our outcomes that we wanted? And at that point, you need to be able to demonstrate that, in fact, you were doing what everybody agreed was the right things to do to get those outcomes. So what we believe is one of the right things to do to get the outcomes is making contacts. This is a list of frontline fundraisers whose names have been expurgated to protect both those who are high performers and those who are not so high performers. And we measure these by the contact type. And most of you who are in something like this business have a report that does something like this. Now, one of the things that occurs when you measure activity is, or anything, is unintended consequences. Let me tell you what at least a couple of those unintended consequences are with this particular report. We use this report quarterly to have meetings between supervisors and frontline fundraisers to talk about how progress is going. It turns out that the majority, the great majority of contact reports are filed in the last week of the quarter because they know the generation date. So that's an unintended consequence. What does that mean to us? It means we got to have some uptime on that contact report system at the end of the quarter, or we're going to have a bunch of unhappy people. So we don't do patches and we don't do upgrades on our systems in the last week of the quarter for that reason. Now this report also focuses on personal visits, the fourth column over from the left, which we think is more important, but not everybody can get personal visits. And we need to know why not, and budget sometimes impacts that. So let me show you another report. This is a report that is interesting in a couple of ways. This is obviously a crowdsourced report here. I happen to have a 22-story office building that I work in, and I like to go climb up the stairs. It helps me manage my stress, and get me out of my chair once in a while, get a little exercise. We call it the Tower of Power. Well, we put a sheet like this up at the top of the Tower of Power every month, and then people walk upstairs and they record the number of floors they walk. It's relatively simple. All you got to do is walk upstairs and write a number on the sheet. But look what happens. This is a mess. But not only that, it turns out that there are some people who really are not motivated by having their name on a list. So there are people who actually do this walk up the stairs but don't record themselves. I'm sad to say there are some people who do not walk up the stairs. They take the elevator and then they go right number. There are also people who walk up the stairs a lot more than they record. There's one person I know her pretty well. She records probably 2 floors a day, and she does 4. She does not want to compete for that top slot. She doesn't, that troubles her. She doesn't want to be in that slot, but she still wants to do it. Now, another characteristic of this, obviously, when you're crowdsourcing, is this is what happens to your data. As we start thinking about, gee, we're going to reach out, we're going to scrape Facebook, and we're going to scrape LinkedIn or whatever. What's going to happen to your data when you start sourcing it like that? I'm not saying we're not going to do it, but this, you need to understand what's actually happening in the data collection and recording out there, because we kind of get to be these data wonks, and these are the numbers, and boy, aren't these authoritative, and aren't these factual and really objective? No, they're not. You need to look at your collection, look at how you're getting it, and look at who's putting it in and what you asked for. So the other thing to illustrate about activity versus outcomes is I'm on this list. In fact, I'm the 4th one down, and I did 947 floors in August. And this is where you really need activity reporting. I do. Because one would think that if I was getting all that exercise, I would have a physique. But look at me. For goodness sakes, this is sad. 947 floors, and it's just disgusting. So obviously I'm not getting that Conan the Barbarian, the Governator as Conan look that I'm aspiring to, but at least I'm doing the activity. So that's why you need activity reporting when you're not getting the outcomes you want, because it at least shows that you were doing something, unless I am one of those people who takes the elevator up and writes a number on the form. So let's go to the outcomes. This is the other side of the contact report, and this is where you begin to get some outcomes. What's interesting about this is that this, unlike the last one where we stack them by the previous month's total so people can aspire to the top spot, these people really cannot compete with each other. They have different prospect bases. The prospects have different wealth, and they have different numbers of prospects and so forth. So the Some of them do compete with each other, but it's not really set up to stack as a competition. The real competition, though, is created by putting the prior year-to-date in there because people want to beat their prior year-to-date number. We're trying to figure out ways to make these reports motivational. Counting drives behavior. How are we going to drive the behavior toward the outcomes we want? This is one of the ways you do it. And the questions that we need to answer with this sort of reporting are, how did our results compare to last year? How do our results compare with our goals? How do our results compare with our peers? And what is our return on investment? If you want to know more about how we do this at the University of Washington, I invite you to find your way to our Board of Regents website and look at the Regents meetings. And we are typically item F4, sometimes F1 or F10 in the University of Washington Board of Regents Finance, Audit, and Facilities Committee meeting. And there we present, my boss and I, our monthly gift report, and it's several pages of reporting, and if you'd like to take a look, you're welcome to. We're the most transparent university in the country on this. We put our monthly gift report in the clear, not password protected, for anybody and their brother to read if you can manipulate the drill down. In November of the last 3 years and coming up here next month, we report our ROI, which shows what we actually spent to raise a dollar, constituency by constituency, and also a 5-year average of that. You won't find that anywhere else. We are transparent. We hang it out there. We're proud of our numbers, but it's also quite scary. So, manage up, manage out. Activity versus outcome. Use activity metrics to reinforce behavior that leads to the outcomes you want. Use outcome metrics to establish goals and objectives. That's it. I've told you. Network, manage up, manage out, focus on mission, learn your clients' jobs. Counting drives behavior. Leadership. Effective leadership is the ability to successfully integrate and maximize available resources within the internal and external environment for the attainment of organizational or societal goals. Do that. It is unfortunate in this quote to characterize human beings as resources, and I apologize for that, but we are talking about people as well as other kinds of resources. So, if you have further questions, you want to engage in this conversation more deeply, you want to network with me, I'm glad to do so. My contact information is tamecat@uw.edu, and that is tamecat, not wildcat. So share your feedback with me, your thoughts, tell me how I can improve my presentation, but don't tell me to wear a suit. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.